Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 274. Chapter 274. When Natasha opened Prince Andrew's door with a familiar movement and let Princess Mary pass into the room before her, the princess felt the sobs in her throat. Hard as she had tried to prepare herself, and now tried to remain tranquil, she knew that she would be unable to look at him without tears. The princess understood what Natasha had meant by the words, 2 days ago this suddenly happened. She understood those words to mean that he had suddenly softened, and that this softening and gentleness were signs of approaching death. As she stepped to the door, she already saw in imagination Andrew's face as she remembered it in childhood, a gentle, mild, sympathetic face, which he had rarely shown, and which therefore affected her very strongly. She was sure he would speak soft, tender words to her, such as her father had uttered before his death, and that she would not be able to bear it, and would burst into sobs in his presence. Yet sooner or later it had to be, and she went in. The sobs rose higher and higher in her throat, as she more and more clearly distinguished his form, and her short-sighted eyes tried to make out his features, and when she saw his face and met his gaze. He was lying in a squirrel fur dressing gown on a divan, surrounded by pillows. He was thin and pale. In one thin, translucently white hand, he held a handkerchief, while with the other he stroked the delicate mustache he had grown, moving his fingers slowly. His eyes gazed at them as they entered. On seeing his face and meeting his eyes, Princess Mary's pace suddenly slackened. She felt her tears dry up, and her sobs ceased. She suddenly felt guilty, and grew timid on catching the expression of his eyes and face. But in what am I to blame? She asked herself. And this cold, stern look replied, because you are alive and thinking of the living, while I... In the deep gaze that seemed to look not outwards but inwards, there was an almost hostile expression as he slowly regarded his sister and Natasha. He kissed his sister, holding her hand in his, as was their wont. "How are you, Mary? How did you manage to get here?" said he, in a voice as calm and aloof as his look. Had he screamed in agony, that scream would not have struck such horror into Princess Mary's heart as the tone of his voice. "And have you brought little Nicholas?" he asked in the same slow, quiet manner, and with an obvious effort to remember. "How are you now?" said Princess Mary, herself surprised at what she was saying. "That, dear, you must ask the doctor," he replied. And again, making an evident effort to be affectionate, he said with his lips only, his words clearly did not correspond to his thoughts, "Merci, chère amie, d'être venu." Princess Mary pressed his hand. The pressure made him wince just perceptibly. He was silent, and she did not know what to say. She now understood what had happened to him 2 days before. In his words, his tone, and especially in that calm, almost antagonistic look, could be felt an estrangement from everything belonging to this world, terrible in one who is still alive. Evidently, only with an effort did he understand anything living. But it was obvious that he failed to understand, not because he lacked the power to do so, but because he understood something else. something the living did not and could not understand, and which wholly occupied his mind. "There, you see how strangely fate has brought us together," said he, breaking the silence and pointing to Natasha. "She looks after me all the time." Princess Mary heard him and did not understand how he could say such a thing. He, the sensitive, tender Prince Andrew, how could he say that, before her whom he loved and who loved him? Had he expected to live, he could not have said those words in that offensively cold tone. If he had not known that he was dying, how could he have failed to pity her, and how could he speak like that in her presence? The only explanation was that he was indifferent, because something else, much more important, had been revealed to him. The conversation was cold and disconnected, and continually broken off. "Mary came by way of Ryazan," said Natasha. Prince Andrew did not notice that she called his sister Mary, and only after calling her so in his presence did Natasha notice it herself. "Really?" he asked. "They told her all about Moscow and how it's been burned down, and that—" Natasha stopped. It was impossible to talk. It was plain that he was making an effort to listen, but could not do so. "Yes, they say it's burned," he said. "It's a great pity." And he gazed straight before him, absently stroking his mustache with his fingers. "And so you have met Count Nicholas, Mary," Princess Andrew suddenly said, evidently wishing to speak pleasantly to them. "He wrote here that he took a great liking to you," he went on simply and calmly, evidently unable to understand all the complex significance his words had for living people. "If you liked him too, it would be a good thing for you to get married," he added rather more quickly, as if pleased at having found words he had long been seeking. Princess Mary heard his words, but they had no meaning for her, except as proof of how far away he was now from everything living. "Why talk of me?" she said quietly, and glanced at Natasha. Natasha, who felt her glance, did not look at her. All three were again silent. "Andrew, would you like," Princess Mary suddenly said in a trembling voice, "would you like to see little Nicholas? He is always talking about you." Prince Andrew smiled just perceptibly, and for the first time, but Princess Mary, who knew his face so well, saw with horror that he did not smile with pleasure or affection for his son, but with quiet, gentle irony, because he thought she was trying what she believed to be the last means of arousing him. "Yes, I shall be very glad to see him. Is he quite well?" When little Nicholas was brought into Prince Andrew's room, he looked at his father with frightened eyes, but he did not cry, because no one else was crying. Prince Andrew kissed him, and evidently did not know what to say to him. When Nicholas had been led away, Princess Mary again went up to her brother, kissed him, and unable to restrain her tears any longer, began to cry. He looked at her attentively. "Is it about Nicholas?" he asked. Princess Mary nodded her head, weeping. "Mary, you know the gospel—" But he broke off. "What did you say?" "Nothing. You mustn't cry here," he said, looking at her with the same cold expression. When Princess Mary began to cry, he understood that she was crying at the thought that little Nicholas would be left without a father. With a great effort, he tried to return to life and to see things from their point of view. Yes, to them it must seem sad, he thought, but how simple it is. "The fowls of the air sow not, neither do they reap, yet your Father feedeth them," he said to himself, and wished to say to Princess Mary, but no, they will take it their own way, they won't understand. They can't understand that all those feelings they prize so, all our feelings, all those ideas that seem so important to us, are unnecessary. We cannot understand one another. And he remained silent. Prince Andrew's little son was 7. He could scarcely read and knew nothing. After that day he lived through many things, gaining knowledge, observation, and experience. But had he possessed all the faculties he afterwards acquired, he could not have had a better or more profound understanding of the meaning of the scene he had witnessed between his father, Mary, and Natasha than he had then. He understood it completely, and leaving the room without crying, he went silently up to Natasha, who had come out with him, and looked shyly at her with his beautiful, thoughtful eyes. Then his uplifted, rosy upper lip trembled, and leaning his head against her, he began to cry. After that he avoided Dessau and the Countess, who caressed him, and either sat alone or came timidly to Princess Mary or to Natasha, of whom he seemed even fonder than of his aunt, and clung to them quietly and shyly. When Princess Mary had left Prince Andrew, she fully understood what Natasha's face had told her. She did not speak any more to Natasha of hopes of saving his life. She took turns with her beside the sofa, and did not cry any more, but prayed continually, turning in soul to that eternal and unfathomable, whose presence above the dying man was now so evident. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 274. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 274. It's okay to cry. It's only natural. There have been some hard lessons and stern meditations so far in A Year of War and Peace. Epictetus, recall, counseled us to consider our own children's death every time we kiss them goodnight. Marcus Aurelius agrees because death is nothing to worry about in the first place. Yikes. Imagine walking into the room with Natasha, Princess Mary, and Nikolushka today, noting their tears, and then casually dispensing with some of that stoic wisdom. Seems a bit inappropriate. Seneca, ever the softy, in his Consolation of Polybius, offers us more comforting words for those in mourning. If we could gain anything by sorrow, Seneca writes, I should not refuse to bestow upon your misfortunes whatever tears my own have left at my disposal. I would force some drops to flow from these eyes, exhausted as they are with weeping over my own domestic afflictions, were it likely to be of any service to you. Seneca's point is that we should comfort and join in mourning, up to a point, those who grieve. And so, the more sensitive among us may feel free today to shed a tear alongside our friends as we await the impending death of Prince Andrew. It is a sad chapter, expertly rendered by Tolstoy. His ability to convert mere text into a lived experience for the reader is truly astounding. There is nothing false here. We have the subtle thoughts and delicate deportment of those confronting the death of a loved one. There is confusion, regret, frustration, and anger. Most of all, though, we have the tears. Princess Mary, no matter how hard she tries, cannot help but cry. So too with little Nikolushka. We must indulge these tears for a bit. Let us join Seneca as he joined Polybius. It's only natural. Tears are the automatic reaction of the body to the death of a loved one. No amount of philosophical study can stop them. Should our friends lose themselves in prolonged grief, however, then it'd be time to bring Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius back into the conversation. Daily Meditation. For by no wisdom can natural weaknesses of the body be removed. That which is implanted and inborn can be toned down by training, but not overcome. The steadiest speaker, when before the public, often breaks into a perspiration, as if he had wearied or overheated himself. Some tremble in the knees when they rise up to speak. I know of some whose teeth chatter, whose tongues falter, whose lips quiver. Training and experience can never shake off this habit. Nature exerts her own power, and through such a weakness makes her presence known, even to the strongest. Seneca, from his Letters. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 274 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me today. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 275 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.